The American people deserve the full and open testimony of every person with knowledge of the planning and preparation for January 6th. We must know what happened here at the Capitol. We must also know what happened every minute of that day in the White House, every phone call, every conversation, every meeting leading up to, during, and after the attack.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. The House Select Committee on January 6th, unequivocal in its commitment to pursuing each and every lead and piece of evidence in its investigation. Translation? Republicans, watch out. As Politico Playbook noted this morning in response to that statement from Liz Cheney, quote, the subtext was unmistakable. McCarthy and Trump-aligned GOP lawmakers like Jim Jordan are likely headed toward a summons or subpoena at some point, especially when we have moments like this one with Jordan yesterday on Fox News, revealing even more about the communications between the former president and his allies on the day of the insurrection.
Did you talk to the former president that day?
I've talked to the former president umpteen times, thousands. I mean not thousands times,
on January
but countless times. I talk to the president. I never talk about what we talk about because I just don't think that's appropriate. Just like I don't talk about what happens in Republican conferences. So
sure.
I've talked to the president numerous times. I continue to talk to the president since he's left office.
on January 6th, Congressman.
Yes, I've talked to the president. I've talked to the president so many. I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president.
Yeah, and on that day was. Can you share any of the insight of what he was thinking about that day?
Brett, the people we need to come testify are the people who can testify to the fundamental questions. Why didn't the United States Capitol, the People's House, have an appropriate security posture on that day? And what have we done? Those are the people we need to hear from.
So now we have yet another Trump ally that we know of who spoke to the ex-president on that day. Jordan's hesitancy and deflection is exactly what the committee wants to pursue. Here's the committee's chair, Congressman Benny Thompson, this morning when our colleague Joe Scarborough asked if he has what he needs to shine a light on what happened on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue that day.
Absolutely, we have. We've had conversations with the White House about limiting, if not eliminating, executive privilege in terms of witnesses and information. We want to talk with the Attorney General to make sure that he comes forth with all the necessary information, as well as the Department of Defense. Nothing is off limits in this investigation. We're absolutely committed to getting to the bottom of what happened. As you know, I have subpoena power. I have no reluctance whatsoever in issuing subpoenas for information, telephone logs to the White House, especially during the times of January 6th. Members of Congress have already admitted that they talked to the White House while it was going on. Now many of them are trying to walk back the conversation they had. But, you know, there's a record. And in this institution, in a democracy, those records are important. We plan to pursue them.
The committee stopping at nothing as President Biden's Department of Justice is forcefully demonstrating it will not help the aiders and abettors of January 6th. Yesterday announcing that former officials could testify in congressional inquiries into efforts by the last administration to overturn the election results. And the department following that up with a decision to decline to defend Congressman Mo Brooks in a lawsuit that accuses him of inciting supporters of Donald Trump at the rally right before the Capitol insurrection. New York Times reports it this way, quote, Brooks had asked the department to certify that he was acting as a government employee during that rally. Had it agreed to defend him, he would have been dismissed from the lawsuit and the U.S. substituted as the defendant. The record indicates that Brooks' appearance at the January 6th rally was campaign activity, and it is no part of the business of the U.S. to pick sides among candidates in federal elections, the Justice Department wrote. Significantly, the Times adds this, quote, the Justice Department's decision shows it is also likely to decline to provide legal protection for Trump in the lawsuit. The law coming down on the side of the truth is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Jake Sherman is here, founder of Punchbowl News. Also joining us, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and professor at the University of Alabama. And Kimberly Atkins-Storr is here, senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe and co-host of the #Sisters-in-Law podcast. Lucky for us, all three MSNBC contributors. Jake Sherman, let me show you Liz Cheney following her. I think it's one of the incidents that you've explained was at the root of her break with McCarthy, suggesting he had something to share in an investigation into January 6th. She now has her sights on Jim Jordan. Watch.
Congressman Jim Jordan was McCarthy's pick for this committee, and this new book, I Alone Can Fix It, reports on an encounter you had with him on January 6th. You told him, "Get away from me, you did this." What did you mean by "you did this," and do you think Jordan should be called to testify?
You know, I think that Congressman Jordan may well be a material witness. He's somebody who was involved in a number of meetings in the lead up to what happened on January 6th, involved in planning for January 6th, certainly for the objections that day, as he said publicly. So he may well be a material witness.
So, Jake Sherman, it's my bet that Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan and Liz Cheney in an elevator ride together is something that you'd love to experience. But talk about Liz Cheney really articulating a witness list of the Trumpiest of Trumpy House members who, in her view, are material witnesses to the deadly insurrection of January 6th.
Well, great to be with you, Nicole. The funny thing is, and I just can't help but mention this, is that McCarthy and Jordan and Cheney were once all pretty close. I mean, I think McCarthy's world was always skeptical of Cheney. I think they were always skeptical of Cheney, but she and Jim Jordan, I remember back in the early days of the Trump administration, they were working together in a way that was on defense hawk matters. And so it's all kind of stunning to me how the world turns, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised. So here's the larger question to me. So it seems completely obvious. You'd have to have your head buried in the sand to not think that Benny Thompson, with the help of Cheney and the help of Adam Kinzinger, they're going to call everybody who may or may not have talked to Donald Trump on that day. Those people will probably include Mark Meadows. They'll probably include Kevin McCarthy. They'll probably include Jim Jordan, all these people. The question, and this is really a question for attorneys, for Joyce, and I don't know who else would have a sense of this, is so the next step is Thompson has said, and what our reporter Christian Hall was there when he said this, that he will not be sending letters, so he won't be asking for cooperation. Congressional investigations usually follow a sequence of we ask for information. If they don't comply, we are going to subpoena them at some point in the future. He said he's going to skip the letter writing thing and just issue subpoenas. Why is he going to do that? I think they've learned some lessons from the impeachments that they're not going to get voluntary cooperation in most cases. I think they might, around the edges, try to recruit people from the former Trump administration to be helpful to them in some way, shape, or form, but they are going to issue subpoenas. So if McCarthy or Jordan don't comply with the subpoenas, is the Justice Department going to hold them in contempt, in criminal contempt? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how you get. I just don't know how that plays out. I understand they're not going to defend executive privilege, but if they decline to talk about this, I don't know what the next step is. And the larger question, and again, I'm not an attorney, but I wonder if they're gonna, if the House has the stomach to go to court to force and compel testimony. I mean, will they get arrested? So again, this is not my expertise, but the politics of this are just impossibly bad for Jordan and McCarthy. Number one, why is it bad for McCarthy? McCarthy voluntarily decided to have no one on this panel, so he's ceded an infomercial to the Democrats and to Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney to have an investigation without any. He has no situational awareness of any of this. It is beyond comprehension that they decided not to put people on after Pelosi rejected Jim Jordan and Jim Banks. And the politics for Jordan and McCarthy is if they get in that room and they're forced to testify under oath, I mean, testifying against Donald Trump, I just don't know how that works politically for them, especially with McCarthy trying to become speaker. So and by the way, Nicole, we have to mention that Kevin McCarthy could have, and Mitch McConnell could have stopped all of this. They had a bill in front of them that was stopped in the Senate that would have given Republicans veto power over subpoenas. veto power over subpoenas. None of this, they could have, even if they wanted to obstruct and not have a real investigation, they could have had that power. So here we are, and if you're a Republican, I don't care what your party is, I mean, it's just, they have no situational awareness. They are going to be dragged in to testify. They have no control over the subpoena substantively and politically, just a complete and utter disaster for them.
We're going to bring the lawyers in a second, but let me unpack some of what you just said. To your first point, McCarthy and Cheney and Jordan were closely aligned because they saw Republican stuff similarly. I think that was your point on policy.
Yes.
Cheney's vigor, it's not just her participation on this committee, but her vigor on this committee. And I know the Cheneys. I worked for the Cheneys. Liz Cheney is going to do this right. Liz Cheney is going to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th. And my question, before we get to the legal side of it, is what is the substance of what Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan are going to testify to? It's sort of an open secret on Fox News. It was Chris Wallace who pulled it out of Liz Cheney that Kevin McCarthy should be subpoenaed. And it was Brett Baer who pulled it out of Jim Jordan that he had also had a conversation with Donald Trump that day. What is the scuttle? What is the open secret about what those guys know about Donald Trump's state of mind that day? Jake Sherman.
Well, they know a lot, right? I mean, Kevin McCarthy, I think, has said publicly, or other people have said publicly, I don't know if it was McCarthy himself, but there's been ample reporting that McCarthy had indicated to Trump that he needed to somehow pull back the protesters or try to pull back the protesters. I think that they would all, I think it's been widely reported in Phil Rucker and Carol Lenig's book and a host of other books about this administration that Trump was very angry that day. And the questions that people are going to want to know is, did Trump say no to the National Guard? Did he? Those are the kinds of things. And by the way, Mark Meadows was probably in the room with him for most of this. I don't know if Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. I mean, there's ample reporting out there to cling on to. And on the Liz Cheney topic, I mean, Nicole, I've been covering her since, you know, when she was in leadership and before. Liz Cheney has, I think it's fair to say, put her career in jeopardy. There's no question about that on this quest to get the truth about January 6th and on her just disdain for Donald Trump and Kevin McCarthy in a state that Donald Trump won by, I don't know, 50-something percentage points. So, you know, she is definitely taking a tack that the truth is more important than party, is more important than elected office. And it's politically, of course, very risky because who knows how that all works out. But it's definitely, I mean, admirable in the eyes of a lot of people on that committee. And I think there are people in the Republican Party, although not many, but on Capitol Hill who admire what she's doing. And listen, again, for a place, and this is a building where everybody tries to do everything they can to get reelected, she is doing everything she can feasibly that would put her election in jeopardy.
And Joyce, I mean, the most notable thing about that is that there are only two, right? I mean, they're not supposed to be there to get reelected. They're supposed to be there to serve the country. So the most notable thing about what Jake just reported, which is of course true, is that there are only two of them willing to put the country ahead of their reelection. That's why we have Kevin McCarthy, who spent more time looking for Donald Trump's Starburst flavors than he spent yesterday watching the men who protected his life on January 6th. I mean, he too believed his life was in danger. That's why he called Donald Trump. That's why Liz Cheney wants him as a witness before this committee. But Joyce, you have a list of witnesses. I want to put it up. You write in Just Security that for the White House, let's start with the White House. The White House role and response, these are the witnesses that the committee should call. Katrina Pearson, a Trump campaign person, Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, Stephen Miller, White House advisor, Ivanka Trump, White House senior advisor, Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, Keith Kellogg, national security advisor to Mike Pence, Eric Hirschman, White House senior advisor, Dan Scavino, the White House deputy chief of staff for communications, Chris Christie, who was on TV while it was underway, criticizing the White House response, Kellyanne Conway, Alyssa Farah, Mike Pence, Mark Short, the vice president's chief of staff. Let's stop there, and we'll get to Congress after that. What is the scope of the investigation into those individuals? What do you want to know?
So I think Liz Cheney gets this exactly right. We want to know everything, because when you're an investigator and you're trying to build a story about what happened, not even looking at a criminal case, but just trying to develop a factual narrative, It's critical that you start at the beginning and move to the end, that you talk to everyone who was in the room, that you get all of the backup documentation, that you understand everyone's awareness of what was going on during that point in time. You know, what Liz Cheney says, that she wants to talk to every witness, is not remarkable. This is just the day-to-day business of investigators. It's almost as though on the Republican side of the aisle, they're saying, well, let's do the 9/11 investigation, but let's only look at what happened with one of the planes. Let's just ignore everything else.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't build a fulsome narrative if you do it that way.
And Joyce, can you speak to what Jake alluded to, the legal process? Clearly, when you've impeached a president twice and you've investigated his campaign for ties to Russia, and Robert Mueller spent 23 months doing that, you know a lot about congressional subpoenas and their limits. In all those investigations, Democrats trying to hold the ex-president and his team accountable came up short. I think Don McGahn, just a few weeks or months ago, finally testified to what he shared with Robert Mueller. What is sort of the current state of play in terms of enforcing congressional subpoenas for people on your list?
Well, unfortunately, the McGahn situation wasn't resolved with a legal ruling. It was actually a compromise that was worked out between McGahn, between the former president's folks, between this White House, and between congressional investigators. So there is no court that has set out parameters for enforcement of these subpoenas. But Democrats appear to be a little bit savvier. I think we heard Representative Thompson making a pretty clear statement that he intended to go straight for the jugular here, to start out with subpoenas. Presumably that's because he understands he may have to get into court early to enforce them. And the Justice Department, at least for limited purposes here for January 6th, seems to be taking a very unusual position, which is that former executive branch employees can come in and they can give unrestricted testimony. That means there will be no assertion of executive privilege, at least from the Biden administration. Certainly the former president will try to throw a sort of a monkey wrench into the works there. But this is a much more focused exercise because it's been informed by, frankly, the failures with these subpoenas for the last 4 years.
And Kim, let's talk about the Garland Justice Department. There's been a lot of consternation about its decision to defend the ex-president in the lawsuit against E. Jean Carroll. The Mo Brooks decision is the opposite sort of analysis that's been made. The analysis that Merrick Garland has reached and publicized is that congressman was not acting in a official government function. He was there as a campaign event. They will not defend him. The lawsuit from Congressman Swalwell and others goes forward. What do you think of that?
Yes, I think that at least in this case, it is a clearer case for the Justice Department to make, to deny that this was a part of his job, frankly. So federal law allows the Justice Department to come in and substitute itself in a case arising out of the performance of duties of an elected official. And it's the same question. The call that was made is very much the same in the E.G. Carroll case. But the Justice Department, it's not a decision I agreed with, but they, based on their own past precedent, said, well, when a president is speaking, it's much more difficult to say that was not a part of his job. But in this case, this activity was pegged as a campaign event. This was Mo Brooks going out and making these comments in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with his job as a member of Congress debating and passing legislation. So this falls so far outside of that there is no place for the Justice Department to come in and intervene. It sends a signal that anyone who was participating in that way that they would come to a different decision. So I think the facts here are much more clear. The facts also would mean that it's less likely that it would be seen that Donald Trump and his comments out there in a campaign event would be seen as falling under this federal law either. So it opens up a big door. It gives a hint of what could be ahead. But as we talked before, this is also a Justice Department that is treading very carefully, making very careful decisions, as Jake pointed out, that are both legal decisions and political decisions about where they're going to step in, where they're going to assert themselves, and where they're not. So I think we're going to have to see.
I want to just press you on that. I mean, this is select committee, and we got to speak to one of its members who said it's going to follow the money. We know that the money spent that day was spent by political organizations, by campaign arms of the ex-president's sort of political apparatus. Do you think Liz Cheney will flinch at the, the facts leader to issuing a subpoena and co-signing a subpoena for Donald Trump? And if it comes to that, what do you think this Justice Department will do?
I think the last part of that question is unknown, because that will wade directly into where the law meets the politics on this issue. I do believe, from everything that we've seen from the members of this select committee, that they are going to go where the facts take them in getting a full and thorough investigation of what led up to that day. Keep in mind, what they are doing is not in furtherance of any lawsuit by Congressman Swalwell or anything else. This is a fact-finding mission that this committee is on, to find out all the relevant facts to determine what happened, so to allow lawmakers to be able to better react to the situation and find out what they want to do. Now, in the process of seeking out that information, of course, if it comes out, it could be used in lawsuits, but I don't think that's front of mind for Congresswoman Cheney or anybody else on that committee. And I think what the Justice Department ultimately decides, I think, because we've seen two ends of the spectrum, right, with Attorney General Garland taking different tacks, I think we'll have to see when we come to that moment. I'm not sure.
We will all be watching together. Jake Sherman, Joyce Vance, Kim Atkins-Storr. I've been dying to talk to all three of you since yesterday. Thank you so much for starting us off this. A recent move by the Biden Justice Department could lead to significant legal exposure, maybe even trouble, for anyone involved in the former president's months-long campaign to toss out the 2020 election results. The DOJ has reportedly sent letters to former Trump administration officials telling them that the department will not block them from testifying to committees investigating the insurrection and the big lie. The chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee welcomed the move, announcing that he'll, quote, proceed to interview relevant witnesses ASAP so we can get to the bottom of this plot to enlist DOJ in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Joining us now, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's a member of the aforementioned Judiciary Committee, as well as of the Foreign Relations and Appropriations Committee. Senator, a lot of what we know from your committee's work, from the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigation and some of the news reporting around it. And I wonder if you would like to speak to Mr. Rosen, Mr. Barr, if you could tell us the kinds of folks who will be of interest to that committee.
Nicole, I'll just say that costs that the National Guard and the Capitol Police need to recoup from January 6th, and some of the proactive investments in increased security needed here. But it's shocking to me that it's taken weeks and weeks to get past partisan objections to moving forward with this security supplemental bill.
And on Sunday, it was billed as a make or break week in Congress. Talk to me about infrastructure. Do we have a deal?
We do, and we're going to vote on the motion to proceed later tonight. This $550 billion in new spending on infrastructure is a big deal. It's going to create 650,000 high-paying, high-skilled jobs. It'll modernize our infrastructure all over the country. It'll make some climate investments in terms of resiliency and proactively improving our electric grid across the country. It'll do everything from paving roads and highways to improving passenger rail and transit to improving broadband. So I'm very glad we are finally moving to vote on this, and I'm optimistic that this will be just the next biggest step in moving forward President Biden's bold agenda for our country.
Let me switch gears just a little bit. President Biden, someone you know very well, is his optimism about the country's ability to do big things, to beat the pandemic? He had set a target of July 4th for independence from the virus. We're now talking about mask mandates again. We've now got 50% of the country that isn't vaccinated. If you talk to him about his optimism about our ability to beat this, would you tell him that it is misplaced, or do you think he's correct to think that we'll ultimately get through all the disinformation and vaccine resistance and put the pandemic behind us?
I spoke to the president earlier today, and he is clear-eyed about the challenges we face. Nobody knows better than our president how divided we are, how much disinformation there is on social media, and how many millions of Americans are hesitating or refusing to get vaccinated because they're not well informed about the underlying science or because of other reasons motivating personal resistance. So I admire his relentless positive focus on getting done the things we need to do to get Americans vaccinated, to distribute funds to help Americans stay in their homes, to help businesses reopen, to help schools reopen. But he's clear that both here in the United States and around the world, we still have a long way to go to be clear of this pandemic, and that one of the real challenges is disinformation, spread by some for political reasons, some for personal reasons. But frankly, where we are seeing this latest, more transmissive variant cause huge problems is in parts of the country where vaccination is low. 97% of the people hospitalized for COVID today are hospitalized because they're not vaccinated. And yes, I think the president realizes that we have big challenges. His confidence in us, his confidence that the American people will ultimately overcome challenges is rooted in our history. And the fact that we overcame really tough challenges before, whether it's the Depression and the Second World War, the Civil Rights Movement, or the labor movement, he knows that we've overcome challenges before and continues to believe that we, the American people, can do it again. But he's clear that's going to be hard.
Senator Chris Coons, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you for spanning all of the day's headlines with us.
When I was 25 years old and then a sergeant in the Army, I had deployed to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom. From time to time, I volunteered to travel on IED-infested roads to conduct supply missions for U.S. and allied forces and local Iraqi population as well. But on January 6, for the first time, I was more afraid to work at the Capitol than my entire deployment to Iraq. In Iraq, we expected armed violence because we were in a war zone. But nothing in my experience in the Army or as a law enforcement officer prepared me for what we confronted on January 6th.
That was U.S. Capitol Police Officer Gonell yesterday during his testimony in front of the House Select Committee, describing his horrific experience on January 6th and actually comparing it to his time serving in Iraq. Gonell described scenes like something out of a, quote, medieval battlefield, as a violent mob tried to breach the Capitol and interrupt the certification of the election result on orders from the former president, or as Officer Gonell's colleagues described him, the hitman, Donald Trump. We're back with Jamal and Paul. Paul, I just need you to expand on a Capitol Police officer saying that January 6th was worse than anything he saw in Iraq.
Well, he broke it down. I mean, you know, over 1 million people have served in Iraq. I've served in Iraq. And very few of them have ever been in direct hand-to-hand combat. None of us faced anything that looked like that. I dealt with crowd control. I dealt with big groups of people when I was doing patrols, but we never had that. What we all saw on TV and we've been seeing on the replays, that was terrifying. And it was overwhelming, and they didn't know if they had any support. And I think it really cut to the core of the idea that America is about teamwork. Whether we're talking about Simone Biles or the officers yesterday, we got to work together. We got to stick together, especially when the stakes are high. And yesterday was an example of true American heroism. It was disgusting. If you're not angry about that, you're not paying attention. But it also shows that American heroes are stepping up every day. I say on my podcast all the time, I pull the Mr. Rogers line, look for the helpers. When things are bad, look for the helpers who are going in. We saw 4 of them yesterday, 4 that our kids can look up to, and 4 that unfortunately are going to have to hold the line in many days to come, because as we've talked about on this show, January 6th is not the end. It's the beginning, and it's the biggest national security threat we face, and we're going to need a lot more people like Officer Gonell in the days ahead.
I mean, the sad sort of counter to that, Jamal, is that we saw them for what they are, fact witnesses of what actually happened on January 6th, but they were trashed last night on the news channel that if you will, the 30% who believe the big lie and are more inclined to attack Officer Gonell than thank him. They happen to intersect with people who don't want to take the vaccine. They also happen to intersect with people who attack Simone Biles. Where do we go from here in this sort of bifurcated reality?
Well, you know, I was told that blue lives matter, or is it that blue lives only matter when it comes to the oppression, subjugation of Black people and other brown people? Because it seems like we hear a whole lot about what the police should mean in our society, what authority should mean when it's in the context of brutalizing other people who don't look like that faction that you just described, because they're here to disrespect, dishonor, and completely disregard these officers as long as they don't go along with this inane plan that they had in mind. I mean, I couldn't agree with Paul more. January 6th was not the culmination. It was not the end. It was truly the beginning, and that sentiment has carried over. And I think what's so hurtful beyond what this has done to our democracy, to the soul of this country, what's so hurtful about this is that there is an intent to never hold the right people accountable who are responsible for these scenes that we're seeing here, that were responsible for an officer losing their life, that were responsible for these officers being left with lifelong trauma. I mean, they're heroes and they have done their duty far and beyond what they're called for, but don't think for a moment that this is something that just goes away after this testimony. I mean, this is something that's going to stick with them forever, and to know that there is no real push, or at least on one side, to never hold the people accountable who are responsible. And I'm not talking about the people pushing that gate there. I'm talking about the people who put all of this in motion. I just feel awful for them because they're not going to get the justice that they truly deserve.
Paul, we talk all the time about the rise of extremism in institutions we traditionally hold up, right, and look to. We talk about it in the military and law enforcement. How do you see this hearing as potentially breaking through? I mean, can it? Do you think it has any chance of doing that?
I do. I mean, it's kind of a moment like when we started seeing coffins coming home from Iraq, or you started seeing real combat footage. It changes when you hear personal narratives, when you understand there are people behind the uniforms, when you understand their pain, and they put color behind what seems to be a political talking point. I mean, this is also, we've talked about this before, Nicole, this is a strategy by extremists and by right-wing attack people and the machine. You know, they continue to attack certain types of people who step forward to express heroism, and they're not attacking white people. Like, let's be honest about this here, right? They're attacking Simone Biles, they're attacking Officer Grinnell, they're attacking Officer Dunn. This is not an offshoot. This is a strategy, and they continue to compound it in part because it animates that extreme part of this movement, which I will say every time I'm on your show, is the #1 national security threat we face right now. It's not Al-Qaeda, it's not ISIS, it's not Iran, it's domestic extremism. Osama bin Laden never took over the Capitol. These people did, and many of them are still out there. I say it on my Twitter feed. If you're upset, you can help. The FBI is looking for these people right now. There are 11 videos of people that are out there that are still on the streets. They're out there, and we can help the FBI. We can lock them up. Either you're with us or you're against us, and many of these people are against us. They're against Team America. They're against the officers, and they need to be held accountable, locked up, put on trial, and put away.
I see all those videos, and I retweet them. I know you do, too. Jemele Hill, Paul Rieckhoff, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We will be back after a short break. Don't go anywhere.